Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session uh, of the World Bank of the ADE Bank's conference on clean energy. It's my great pleasure to host this session. And my name is Tatsuto Yukihara. I'm a professor at Nagoya University, Japan. And also currently, I'm a guest professor at Energy Research Center of Malmö University in Sweden. So we have 6 hours time differences. I'm sorry to not familiar with the system yet. And today we will have a session called Combined Stimulus Recovery with Green Energy Transition. Actually, last night, I watched the videos recorded before, and also I have a look of your presentation PPT. I found that the session's original initiative topics are something different from the presentation you will give today. But anyway, I will try my best to say something about the green finance and the renewable energy or something like that. The background of this session is that from last January, we have been suffering a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic. And the pandemic give a huge impact and damage on the world economy and our life. Still now, in European countries and also other African countries, Asian countries are suffering from the pandemic. However, since last, I think December, some countries, especially in China, Japan, and some Asian countries, Thai, began to recover from the pandemic, and their economic growth become faster than before. According to IMF and the World Bank's prediction, this year, the world economy might have a 5% growth rate. And some countries like China will have an 8% annual growth rate. This is a good thing, but we also worry about that many countries issued a big deal of, encourage economic recovery deal. So this huge investment will go to activities of economy and society. So in order to have a quick economic growth, some countries may have a black development. So we are worried about the recovery should be a green or black. So in this session, we just want to say that after the post-pandemic, we should have a green recovery. And to do this, the first thing is to finance, to have a green finance, green investment, and also encourage every country to set up their target to have a carbon neutrality goals issued by the United Nations. So this session, we will invite many famous scholars and managers or government officers to give a keynote speech, and then we will discuss the possibility how to, have a green finance, green banking, and how to have a green recovery after the pandemic. So today we are very happy to have 4 panelists and one here. So according to the schedule of the conference, we may ask you, everybody, to have a 10 minutes presentation. And also we will have a panel discussion at the final session. So because the time limitation, and also I'm not sure how many audience will be here today, but according to yesterday's experience, there's not so many audience and also not so many questions from the audience. So I may suggest everybody here to stay here and remain in the last part of panel discussion, because we have one panelist, and after that we may raise questions and answer questions in summary. So we're not going to ask questions by one, but in the last summary at the end of the session, during the panel discussion period, we will ask questions. Is that okay? Okay, now we are very pleased to invite Mr. Roberts van Sweden, the Managing Director of Asia Pacific Convention Blended Finance, to give us a talk about the role of design grant fundings to accelerate capital mobilization into climate actions. So please.
Thank you so much, Tatsuto-san. I much appreciate it. Thank you for a kind introduction.
And you may have 15 minutes.
I think actually more brief than that. I think it's to be compressed within 5, so I'll do my very best. My role and my privilege really is to start with a scene setter on design grant funding to accelerate capital mobilization into climate action. You'll appreciate that design grant funding isn't necessarily fully equating with stimulus recovery. For one, our design funding started in 2016, well before the pandemic or any crisis was at hand. While design grant funding often comes from public sector sources, that's not always the case, as my brief presentation will show. I hope everybody will have no problem seeing me or hearing me, and also seeing the presentation that I'll scroll through. Let me see if yes. So as Tatsuto-san said, my name is Robert van Zwieten. I'm the Managing Director for Asia Pacific for Convergence, and I can be reached at rvz@convergence.finance. I'll go right into it given the time constraints. So Convergence is the global network for blended finance. We're a non-for-profit. We generate blended finance data, intelligence, and deal flow to try and increase private sector investment in developing countries in an effort to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We run a global membership community. I'll show you a slide after this that shows some of our membership. We do an awful lot of data and intelligence. We, amongst others, have the largest historical deals database on blended finance. We are also a restricted broker and run an online matchmaking platform to essentially marry up the supply and demand for blended capital. And for purposes of our conversation today, we run market acceleration programs, particularly design grants funding, to try and nudge interesting ideas, innovative vehicles that practice blended finance into being in an effort to try and catalyze private capital to global development at scale. So it's really the solutions that promise both scale, replicability, and an additionality that we're after. So just a quick snapshot of our membership composition. I won't go into detail. We've got about 200 member institutions. There are about 1,000 staff at member institutions that actively use our platform. So it's become an online platform that's really come to life, very vibrant. And I'd be remiss not pointing out, of course, that our host ADB is also one of our members. So what is blended finance? Very quickly, just some key features of blended finance. Blended finance is needed because we know there's an annual funding gap threatening the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's about a $2.5 trillion annual gap. That's a pre-COVID calculation, so it's probably more at this point. And the way we define blended finance is the strategic use of public and/or philanthropic capital to try and catalyze private sector capital in emerging markets, ideally at scale. Blended finance, you'll see, has 3 hallmarks in our definition. There needs to be some degree of financial return and a risk return for private investors in line with market. There must, of course, be impact, ideally toward the SDGs, although not every participant needs to have that impact objective. And there needs to be an element of leverage. the public philanthropic parties hope to catalyze private sector capital into these blended finance transactions. So what is design funding? We provide early stage grants to, as I said, innovative blended finance structures that look to mobilize private capital for sustainable development at scale. Additionality, scale, replicability are all keywords. It's no secret that blended finance can be complex, can be time intensive, it can be costly to structure and to launch. And so this design grant funding process hopes to encourage practitioners to come up with vehicles that otherwise would be too risky or too complex, but do show high potential for attracting private capital at scale. So what activities are we funding? Well, there's a feasibility study to explore the sheer feasibility of the vehicle, so the investability, the bankability of the transaction, market scoping, and developing the vehicle structure. We have a proof of concept grant. If the feasibility study has been completed, we move on to complete all the design activities, the structuring activities to actually launch the vehicle. And just one note, that grant funding is not to be used for operating capital or to fund working capital of an already established vehicle. That probably stands to reason. So just a quick snapshot. We have so far been operating 3 grant design windows. One is from Global Affairs Canada, started in 2016 and has now run to its completion. I'll talk about this one a bit further. We at this point have an Indo-Pacific DFED-funded climate finance and gender equality window, 3.5 million Aussie dollars, and a natural capital window in Indo-Pacific, which is funded by the RS Group, and Convergence is the one operating these windows. Altogether, these windows, we have awarded about $7 million, $7.2 million to be exact, 23 solutions supported, and about $650 million, actually slightly more than that, mobilized. And if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, then it would be this number just on the Global Affairs Canada Global Emerging Market. The other ones are still running, but this has run its course, and so we can take it in isolation and do a thorough review of it, which I'll get to in a minute. But if there's one thing you take away from this, is that we've awarded funding of about $6 million out of this particular GAC window and mobilized 100 times over of capital. You'd be wondering perhaps, why do development agencies and de-advised MDBs not do a lot more of this meaningful design grant funding work? I don't know the answer. They should, because it is highly impactful and the multiplier effect is pretty stunning. You'll see it's fairly evenly divided over the region, with perhaps sub-Saharan Africa standing out. That correlates to the sectoral activities. There's a lot of agriculture going on. Energy, financial services are quite dominant areas in blended finance. We've tried in this particular window to also emphasize non-energy infra, health, education, and agriculture, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Just a blurb at the bottom right on the SDG alignment, and the grantee types are really fairly evenly distributed. I won't stop here. There's a full grant portfolio to be seen on our website, and I invite you to go there. What is important though, and I'm almost running out of time, is that we did publish just in April a deep dive report on this particular Global Affairs Canada design window. Key questions being, what factors have contributed to the success of recipients? What are the primary barriers when you bring blended vehicles to markets, and how can findings from grantees better equip practitioners to launch successful vehicles and basically incorporate market-wide learnings. So I have a few more slides on key learnings. I take solace from the fact that all of this is being uploaded on the ASEF website and is all available for people to take a closer look at. I would certainly also invite everyone with interest in blended finance and in design grant funding to take a look at that report, which is available on our website, convergence.finance, and hopefully learn and incorporate some of the lessons that we have taken away from this activity. I would just close, if I may, with this last one, which sounds like a very obvious statement: to measure impact meaningfully, develop metrics and reporting practices alongside structuring activities. You'd wonder, how is it a key learning or a recommendation? It is because 40% of blended finance vehicles do not report on their impacts on the developmental outcomes that they hope to have, at least not publicly, maybe to stakeholders, but not publicly. And that, of course, hinders the development of the field, because if I don't know what's worked, I don't know really what to do going forward in terms of structuring, implementing my blended finance structure that's still on the drawing table. So I would just close with really a sort of a prompting of all practitioners in development of blended finance to please generously and publicly disclose impact, so we can all learn and do more with the money that's being received. This presentation also has some blurbs about the current Indo-Pacific design window on climate and gender from DFAT, the natural capital window from the RS group. I won't get to this unless there might be a question on this. These are still early reflections about natural capital. Very interesting, but interesting and hard. And again, I would just direct you to the website. And Tatsuta-san, I'm very happy to yield now to the discussion chaired by you, and just leave it at this for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. A very interesting talk. And also, last night I have a quick glance at your company's homepage. I found that you have been done a lot of work already, and also you mobilized a great number of money to help some countries to have some blended financing. I may raise some questions for your consideration, and we can discuss at the panel session. First one is that how can you choose the country and the sector or the firms to be financed? Because you have your standard already, I heard from you, but how can you choose that? Second one is that, do you have any successful story or cases that you financed and they help them to develop economy, but also their economy is green? And the third one is that have you done some assessment or review after financing these sectors or countries? So I think that we may discuss these three questions later, and I may ask you to consider it at this time. Okay, second presentation will be Tamaron Knopf, Senior Policy Advisor, Clean Growth and UK PEC. Are you there?
I believe I will be starting that presentation, and we're doing it with Tamaron. So it is Leila Purakin here. I'm the program director for international climate finance in the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK. And the UK PACT program is our flagship technical assistance program. And this will be a double act with my colleague Tamaron Knapp, who is based in our domestic clean growth team, because we thought this morning we would tell you about our international work, but also about what we're doing in the UK on green recovery. So let me start with my first slide, which is essentially a graph that shows why it is so important from an emission reduction perspective to focus on green recovery. And we thought it was an important place to start. And this is based on the UNEP emissions gap report of 2020. I mean, with the COVID crisis, of course, emissions are going to go down as economic activity dips. But we know, and all the analysis shows, that this is only very temporary, and that economies will bounce back and potentially bounce back pretty fast. So we have to make sure that when we build back our economies, we build them back better, and we'll build them back in a green way, but not only in a green way, but it's also in a way that is inclusive and resilient. And that is quite essential if we want to make sure that we keep temperature increases below 1.5 degrees. So this is essentially what these numbers show you on the screen. And it is, as you know, at the end of the year, we are going to be taking over the COP presidency in the UNFCCC and be hosting COP26 in Glasgow. And for us, this is an absolute priority, and green recovery is something that we are very keen to promote through the course of our presidency. Next slide, please. So this this slide kind of carries on with that message of the importance of green recovery, and really we wanted to highlight the fact that all the analysis that we have done internally, but also analysis from different organizations around the world, point to the fact that a green recovery is in every country's self-interest, because it does create jobs that are more sustainable and that help that transition toward low carbon economy. We have seen that the price of and the cost of renewable energy is going down dramatically. And so the return on investment when you invest in these green projects is very sustainable and financially sustainable. And you can see actually around the world, including in Southeast Asia region, that you have companies that are perfectly profitable for now, but that are starting to struggle to attract investors because they haven't really embarked on that kind of low carbon transition of their business models yet. So that's a clear trend that we are seeing in the UK, but also globally. And finally, I think that last number you can see on the slide, that sustainable recovery could lead to global GDP being 3.5% higher in 2023 than it would otherwise have been. So that really goes a long way to show that a green recovery can make recovery faster and better. So it is not only in our interest as globally to reduce our emissions and embark on green recovery, but it is also in each individual's country's interest, as it will boost our recoveries and make them more sustainable and faster. Now, let me move on to the next slide. So this is just to focus a bit more on the work we've been doing internationally. And as I said, I lead the work on technical assistance, and our flagship program is the UK Pact. We've got a range of programs.
Excuse me,
Yes.
the slide does not move. So anybody who can help us to move the slide is the same. The slide does not work. No,
Okay.
Anybody who can help us?
Yeah, I think this slide, I think people can see the right slide, I believe. So I'm going to continue.
Now it's okay.
So yes, yeah. Okay. So so focusing on our work, on our international work, as I was saying, we've got a range of technical assistance programs, but the UK Pact was created in 2016 following the Paris Agreement to recognize the need for developing countries to have support to implement their nationally determined contributions. And we've got a number of components that help within that program. We've got the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, and we also have the ability to deploy UK expertise through Skillshares, secondments. We also have the ability to co-create projects with our partner governments in developing countries to design our support to what they truly need. So, and Tamarin is based in our domestic clean growth team, and her role is very much so to also help us share that expertise that we're building every day in our domestic teams. So I just wanted to point out that in the work we're doing, we've 3 lessons that we've really learned over the course of the past few years. One is the importance to break silos inside and outside governments. And by that, I mean really kind of bringing together the discussions on economic growth with the discussions on climate change and climate emission reductions and low carbon transition. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it is not really happening in practice in many, many institutions, including in multilateral development banks, including in the UK government, including, probably in all the partner governments we work with. So this is something that we really need to work on and make sure that, the finance ministries and the planning ministries really take control of that discussion. We need to make sure as well that the capability is there in all our organizations and that the economic growth experts also fully understand and are fully trained to understand the challenges posed by climate change and are able to bring together and marry these considerations together. And this is a lot of the work we do with UK Pact is try to increase that expertise and knowledge worldwide. And finally, to improve the way that climate finance is dispersed, we've got initiatives out there like the NDC partnership, which are designed to bring donors together and to coordinate them and to make sure that collectively, as suppliers of climate finance, we do this in a coordinated way and in an effective way. And this year, we are co-chairing the NDC partnership in the UK together with our colleagues from Jamaica. So it's a real honor for us to play this role, but just I wouldn't be doing my job if I did not emphasize the role of an initiative like the NDC partnership and the need to coordinate ourselves better. So I'm going to turn to Tamarin to walk you through quickly what we have been doing in the UK for our own green recovery. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leila. If we could have the next slide, please. Great. So, yes, so as Leila said, I'm going to be talking about how domestically we can ensure that efforts to rebuild the global economy focus on supporting green and inclusive and this resilient recovery that we need. So obviously there are a number of ways that governments can achieve this, and each recovery plan is going to be unique to the particular circumstances in each country. But in my opinion, we need to be thinking creatively about ways that we can bring green into the picture. And so I really like the 6 principles that are set out that I've set out here on the left, which is from the UN Secretary General. And I think this shows the flavor of how we can be challenging each measure that we put in place and saying to ourselves, can we make this green? So turning to what's happened in the UK, the UK published in November 2020 the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green recovery. And that sets out the 10 actions that the UK will take to build back better and to accelerate this path to net zero. And just to put it in some context, this was published after a year where the UK was faced with the challenge of the pandemic, whilst at the same time having just left the EU and was managing that transition, and also with the UK being due to host the COP26 that year. Obviously, it was later postponed. But really, the UK government recognised that this was an important moment in time and wanted to make our priorities clear both to the UK public and internationally. So it really is a milestone publication. And I wanted to briefly talk about some factors that have contributed to the success of the plan. Firstly, the plan builds on a strong foundation of detailed analysis and strategy and policy development. It's a foundation that's built up in the UK over a number of years. So, for example, the Energy White Paper, which was published just after the 10-point plan, was actually a number of years in the making, and that sets out our decarbonisation plan for the energy sector in more detail. The UK's carbon budget process is also based on substantial modelling and analysis that's there to set our targets and to monitor progress. So, this document, the 10-point plan, builds on all of that evidence. Secondly, the plan was obviously a huge coordination effort between core teams and between sector teams across government, as well as Treasury and the Cabinet Office. But this was successful and was able to proceed because of the hard work that the UK has put into improving governance structures and continues to develop that. So, for example, in October 2019, the PM, the Prime Minister, it was announced that he would chair a cabinet committee on climate change. And that's also supported by an additional committee, which is chaired by the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, the Secretary of State, Kwasi Kwarteng. And these structures really help us to ensure that climate action gets the priority it deserves and supports coordination across multiple departments. The third factor is around the fact that the 10-point plan prioritizes delivery, and so that means that the plan and all of the actions and targets set out are things that we're confident we can deliver. But it's important to note that core teams played a huge role in stretching the ambition of the various sectoral teams that were involved. And they did that by really challenging them to set as ambitious a target as possible. And then the last factor is to say that the publication, it didn't just end with the publication of the 10-point plan. We are continuing to track and our progress to these actions. And that's been monitored at senior levels. So moving on to the next slide. Please. I think that's not sure if it's appeared yet. Yes. So this just gives you a high-level overview of the plan, and I won't go into the details. But essentially, the plan focuses on projects that have impact in terms of creating jobs. Many of those are large infrastructure projects, and many of them are also projects that unlock further decarbonisation down the line. So, for example, carbon capture and storage helps to, once that's in place, you can unlock decarbonisation in wider sectors, as well as low carbon hydrogen, which allows one to decarbonise downstream. So it really is a comprehensive plan that is able to deliver both decarbonisation and green recovery. And moving to the last slide to end off. I think it's not appearing. Yes. I'll just point you, I think Leila mentioned this as well, to our Skillshare program, which is part of UK Pact. And this program is a way of supporting countries to meet their climate change goals and sharing UK expertise and knowledge so that we can help other countries in meeting the challenges of climate change. And this program is very demand-led, so we're asking other countries where they need assistance and aiming to support them. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do contact myself or anyone from the UK Pact team. Thank you very much. I'll end off there. You're on mute.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for your for a wonderful presentation. It's very impressive. I may say some words before the next presentation that actually UK is one of the leading countries providing many good ideas, concepts like such as a low carbon economy, climate change, because I have many friends in UK, Nicolas Stern, and also Double Guan from East Anglia, who are very famous in climate change economics. So we may discuss later about your presentation, but I may raise a few questions about that. Firstly, that you been done a lot of work about green finance. So especially focus on climate change issues. Did you set some climate change target when you finance a country or finance a sector or choosing a sector to do the investment? And the second is that you talk about a very important issue of capability building, because especially some developed countries, they don't know how to green the economy, how to have a green recovery, and also they have no so high skills and capability or something like knowledge about the green economy. So how did you or how do you think about the building of capability in developed countries to help them to have knowledge, to help them skill, and to help them to have a green investment, something like that. And the third one is that about a business model. So you talk about business model. This is a very important issue because you have an investment, you have a plan, you have a target, but a good model will lead you to a success, but a bad model may lead you to a failure. So if possible, could you please talk briefly about your business model suggestion or something like that? So we leave 3 questions for discussion at the panel session, and I wish you can consider it now. Okay, next one will be Lana Zaman, Associate Sustainable Development Officer, UN and DSA. So also you have 10 minutes for speak. So please.
Hello, I'm Lana Zaman. I'm here from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, but presenting today as an independent researcher, and I'll be presenting the findings of a recent paper I wrote, Financing Green Energy in a Post-COVID World, Building Back Cleaner and More Resilient Energy Systems. So this paper is part of a larger book by the Asian Development Bank Institute, which will be published by the Edward Elgar, either late this year or early next year. To give just a little bit of background, I'm sharing a visual here from UNEP's most recent emissions gap report. So what you see here is a comparison of emissions in 2020 compared with 2019 as a baseline. And of course, as you'd expect, there's a huge drop in emissions in March of 2020, but that really quite rapidly rises once again. Overall, global emissions in 2020 were down by 6.4%. And while that might seem large, it's actually insufficient to meet the Paris Agreement. Overall, it is suggested that there's been no real change in the climate change trajectory as a result of 2020. Some of the most recent research also suggests that projections for 2021 show a large increase once again in emissions that would reverse 80% of this reduction. And just looking at the economic and social context, of course, there's been a lot of suffering due to the pandemic. And looking at one component of that, ILO estimates that equivalent to about 255 million full-time jobs were lost. So what is the role of green recovery here? We're at a very special time right now where we have very agile systems because there has been so much policy change, because public perceptions have changed, and because there's more attention to and caring for social and environmental issues. That combined with the fact that, of course, there are all these stimulus recovery packages really creates an opportunity to transform the climate trajectory by investing in green. Green recovery and green energy also creates a lot of economic benefits. I'm just going to highlight 2 here, but there are certainly many. Firstly, the lower levelized cost of energy of solar and wind is such that by replacing some of the most expensive coal with these resources, globally, we could be saving $23 billion a year. A second massive benefit is that while fossil fuels tend to be very capital intensive, renewable energy and energy efficiency tend to be a lot more labor intensive, meaning that they use less equipment and more people. And as a result of this, they create 4 to 6 times as many jobs for the same amount of energy. And this is really a huge benefit at a time when we're looking at economic crisis and unemployment. Early global trends in green recovery. We see that already there are 34 countries and many companies who have already made net zero emissions commitments. So there's definitely some commitment there. And there's also been an increase in the greenness of stimulus packages based on an assessment by Vivid Economics. The purpose of this paper is to examine the early trends in government policies and investments in energy since the pandemic in a few countries in Asia. I'll be sharing some opportunities and challenges by sector, as well as some recommendations. The methodology uses data from the Energy Policy Tracker, which shares, I'll be sharing data from 9 countries, as well as some analysis and case studies. The countries included are Bangladesh, China, India, Republic of Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Vietnam. So you see there's a mix of different economic, social, geographic contexts. Since January of 2020, there have been 174 new energy policies identified in these countries with a commitment of $245 billion. So what you're seeing here is 2 charts. The one on the left shows the divide of the value committed in US billions dollars. So it's divided into different policy categories. And on the right, we're looking at the same breakdown of different types of policies, but we're looking at the number of policies. And the reason I'm showing you both of these is that there were some very important policies that have a lot of value, but maybe they didn't have a specific dollar commitment yet. Breaking these down, the largest category was clean conditional. So these are policies that are designed to transition away from fossil fuels, but maybe they don't have really specific environmental safeguards. So this included a lot of policies about electric vehicles. This falls in this category because we don't know for sure what type of energy is generating the electricity. It also included some green city initiatives. The second largest category was other energy, which included hydro, nuclear, and also multi-fuel. So this category covered a lot of mixed clean and dirty energies. The third was fossil unconditional. So this included policies to support fossil fuel or fossil fuel industries without any type of requirement for climate targets or anything like that. The largest categories under this included policies relating to coal plants and also bailouts for the aviation industry. The next largest category, which was quite a bit smaller, was fossil conditional. These policies pertain to fossil fuel industry, but with the intention of some kind of a climate or environmental target. Policies in this category included those pertaining to liquid natural gas and some relating to emission standards and fossil fuel taxes. Lastly, the smallest category in terms of commitment, although there were quite a few in terms of number of policy, were clean unconditional. So these are the cleanest policies really set just to increase clean energy use. And this included things like net zero emissions commitments among countries including China, Japan, and Republic of Korea. Here I've broken down the energy trends by sector. What I'll just highlight here, the largest category has been power generation, which included really quite a mix of clean and dirty energy policies. Other large categories were mobility, resources, multiple sectors, and buildings. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about these categories. I've highlighted some opportunities that are available in the PowerPoint, but for now, I'll just focus on the early trends to save time. In terms of power generation, in the green policies, we saw that all of these 9 countries I've examined had some kind of policies to boost the use of solar or wind. Some countries also had policies for hydro and one had for nuclear. In terms of some of the gray policies, there was an increase in fossil fuel subsidies, which is a bit mixed because on the one hand, this can be socially beneficial, of course, at a time when people are economically struggling, but there might be more efficient ways to provide those social benefits. Fossil fuel subsidies in the long term have been shown to benefit really large scale, more high income users more so than low income users. So this might not be best for long-term sustainability. There were also a lot of policies pertaining to new coal plants in an effort to stimulate the economy. So one note here, recent projections suggest that global coal demand is going to increase by 4.5% in 2021, and 80% of that is driven by the Asia region. In terms of mobility, some of the green early trends we saw, there's been investment in large-scale transport, particularly One Rail in India. There's also been a lot of investment in EVs and EV infrastructure, including in China and Japan. There was also some interesting support for low-income users, such as rickshaw drivers, which is a very socially beneficial policy. On the gray side, there were many bailout packages for fossil fuel-based industries like aviation, and these came without any kind of climate targets or incentives. So that really constitutes a missed opportunity because that could have been attached with perhaps some kind of climate target. And now looking at buildings, in terms of the early green trends, several policies to support energy efficiency upgrades in buildings, and some of these also include public buildings and government buildings. There were also many sustainable city initiatives. On the more gray side, or also the social side, there were many subsidies to renters and homeowners that again can be socially beneficial, but they came without any kind of climate targets attached. So overall, in conclusion, with many countries globally and in the Asia region committing to net zero, there is a clear prioritization of climate change issues, but the question is, will this be enough? The current trajectory suggests that there has been little progress towards really reducing global warming. On the beneficial side, some beneficial policies included a lot of policies supporting renewable, particularly variable renewable and energy efficiency. There were also investments in sustainable systems like mobility and green cities. On the negative side, of course, there's been a lot of fossil fuel subsidies without any sort of climate targets. And there's also been a lot of investment in fossil fuel plants, particularly for coal. There have also been a lot of bailouts for fossil fuel intensive companies and industries without any climate targets. So recommendations, the first recommendation is to direct recovery packages to fund green policies, particularly to include social elements where possible, because this is an opportunity to both benefit the climate change situation, but also the economic growth and job creation. Secondly, ensure that recovery is both green and socially inclusive by prioritizing universal energy access. Thirdly, create an enabling environment for companies to invest in green projects. The public sector can't go it alone. And fourthly, remove fossil fuel subsidies while energy demands are low and with consideration for social equity and where it's most appropriate to make these adjustments first. Also, put a price on carbon. This is really critical to providing that incentive to change. And lastly, if anyone is interested, this paper again will be published by Edward Elgar late this year or early next year. It is an initiative of ADBI. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lana. It's very interesting paper. Actually, I said I heard you from you. You will publish the paper in a journal or something like that. Actually, I mean, welcome to submit your new paper to our journal called Applied Energy. I'm a guest editor of a special issue about the climate change and energy system transition in the post-pandemic. So it started a paper call already, and I will be happy to invite you to submit your new paper to our special issue. Actually, I'm not want to say expert, but I'm not very familiar with the issues of climate change and CO2 emissions. As you mentioned that the CO2 emission has been increased in recent years after a slight decline in 2017. We have some estimation and publications in Nature Climate Change last year and this year. And we have estimations to say that in last year, a climate change issue have been modified a little because the CO2 emission have been reduced by 7 to 9% according to our paper and also according to the report of our International Energy Agency. However, this year, we predict that the world CO2 emission will gradually increase, maybe 1 point to 2%. So this is a very serious situation we have to deal with that. So I'm happy you are the first person to present issues about energy because our session is on energy. And I may raise a few questions about your paper and we can discuss later. One thing is that you mentioned the renewable energy and fossil fuel energy. So how do you think that renewable energy can be totally replace the traditional energy? Because we have a target to say that by 2050, most countries will. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, so I just got the picture fixed. And secondly, is that you mentioned about coal-fired power generation. As we know that to realize the UN's carbon emission targets, many countries set up their own roadmap to finish the coal-fired generation. But for many countries like India, Indonesia, and even China and Vietnam, they still need a lot of coal-fired power generations. So how to assess this kind of activities in your study? So should the coal-fired power generation continued or stop as soon as possible? Because the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank have an announcement to stop finance the coal-fired power generation in the future. So this is second question. The third question is about another new type of energy called hydrogen. So hydrogen energy is a very popular engine now, and also many countries are doing very fast about the development of hydrogen power. So in your study, do you think that hydrogen power generation, especially can be used for transportation, building, or steel, iron, industries? So how do you think the function of the hydrogen power in the future? Okay, these three questions we can discuss later. And so we have another, maybe the final, a presenter, Mr. Marlon.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, good day, colleagues. I am Marlon Joseph Apanyada, convener of the Greening the Banks initiative, led by Allotrope Partners. I also serve as strategic advisor to Allotrope Partners and a Southeast Asia engagement lead for climate and energy for the World Resources Institute, or WRI. I would like to thank the Asian Development Bank and this panel for providing us this opportunity for us to showcase the insights that have been gathered by Allotrope Partners' Greening the Banks initiative, or GTB, over the course of the past year. Next slide, please. Greening the Banks, or GTB, was established amid these four challenges and also opportunities, which I'm sure we're all already very familiar with. There is an unprecedented scale of investment needed to avoid catastrophic climate change, which needs to be covered by private investments, as governments on their own have insufficient resources. Additionally, sustainability is now good business, as more and more sustainable investments are seeing better performance than traditional equivalents. But despite this, there continues to be barriers that need to be overcome to accelerate progress of sustainable finance. To help the Philippine banks and the regional player financial institutions capture these opportunities and unlock scaled green investments in the country and beyond, Allotrope Partners established the Greening the Banks Initiative, or GTB, in 2019. Next slide, please. Through Greening the Banks, we are engaging with the different stakeholders to bridge the gap among banks, regulators, developers, and civil society organizations, and help address the barriers that these groups are facing. Greening the Banks leverages the experiences of the Allotrope Partners team in the emerging markets and our expertise with renewable energy and project facilitation to be able to address these gaps and make sure that high-level global and regional principles are actually being taken up and implemented on the ground, turning commitments into action and making sure those actions are actually contributing to transformative change. Next slide, please. Since Allotrope Partners launched Greening the Banks in 2019, we have been able to cultivate and build a coalition of sustainability finance leaders in the Philippines and beyond, including a full range of Philippine banks, from the largest like BDO and BPI to some of the smallest rural and community banks, as well as key government officials, regulators such as the Central Bank of the Philippines or Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, along with developers, civil society organizations, and other market stakeholders. Other GTB results to date are shown on the screen. Next slide, please. The past several months, we've had an amazing opportunity to design and host, in collaboration with the Philippine Central Bank, or BSP, and expert speakers, a series of dialogues on climate-related physical and transition risks and green finance challenges and opportunities, whose takeaways I will be sharing in the next few slides. Through these webinars, we've been able to engage over 550 participants, representing more than 160 commercial, rural, cooperative, and local banks across the Philippines and beyond, along with a range of other energy and finance market stakeholders. Next slide, please. We held a webinar with more than 400 financial leaders representing 130 rural banks, savings and loan associations, and cooperative banks from across the Philippines to further their understanding of climate-related physical risks. From the poll provided, we see that while over 2/3 of rural and community bankers have expressed it is very important to assess physical risks, more than half of them are only slightly familiar or not at all familiar with how to proceed. We also heard from our expert speaker, Dr. Bayangos of the Central Bank, that their research findings using the Central Bank's supervisory data show that local banks are not impervious to the effects of extreme weather events. Extreme weather events, which happen all the time in the Philippines, negatively affect banks' loan growth and deposit growth, especially for rural and cooperative banks. This emphasizes the urgent need to increase banks' familiarity with climate-related physical risks and build their capacity to assess these risks and integrate physical risks into risk management frameworks. Next slide, please. In another webinar, we had a focused discussion, this time on climate-related transition risks with Philippine commercial and universal banks. Again, a poll was provided, and we saw that the respondents indicated that exploring transition risk is very important to their bank. However, more than half of the participating bankers from commercial banks are only slightly familiar or not at all familiar with transition risks, with another 37% being only moderately familiar. Besides exposure to the energy sector, of which the Philippine banks have a 9.6% direct loan exposure, other sectors with high transition risks identified by our speakers from leading banks include mining, oil and gas, and steel and metal manufacturing, among others. Logistics, such as trucking businesses, was specifically identified to be affected in the medium term due to advances in technology. Our speakers indicated that even if the banks has no direct exposure to fossil fuel industry, the energy transition, being systemic in nature, could trigger a chain reaction that might positively or negatively impact the performance and viability of various loan and investment portfolios. The low carbon transition also presents opportunities for banks to offer guidance to clients exposed to carbon-intensive sectors, structure innovative financial products like transition bonds, provide finance restructuring, risk-sharing facilities and guarantee facilities, and support the overall greening of their clients' assets. As with physical risks, successfully managing transition risks provides opportunities for the banks as well as to provide brand and reputational advantages. Next slide, please. Here, we share the takeaways from our virtual dialogue, linking the National Renewable Energy Board, renewable energy developers, and financiers. We heard from NREB that the country is working towards reaching 35% renewable energy in the power mix by 2030, which presents at least ₱1 trillion or $20 billion investment opportunity. Almost 47 terawatt hours of new renewable energy generation, equivalent to 20 gigawatts of a solar-driven build-out, is needed to meet this goal within this decade. GTB, along with our network of partners, will continue to support the financial sector, tackle these challenges, and ensure an inclusive energy transition in the country. Next slide, please. In this slide, we show the next steps for banks to move forward and manage the low carbon transition. On this slide, you can see the recommendations of Mr. Weifang Zhang, Regional Head for Corporate Sustainability of HSBC Asia Pacific, as he shared these steps towards managing climate risks and capturing opportunities in the low carbon transition. It is worth noting that first, WRI and WWF are currently working with HSBC, one of the world's largest banks, in their sustainability journey and net zero goals. And second, a platform like the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator is also working with HSBC, especially in Vietnam and Indonesia, to enhance capacity on clean energy financing opportunities. So here's HSBC's Weifang Zhang's first 3 steps that can be done immediately. First, fact-finding, identifying the bank's exposure to climate risk. Banks should identify their individualized level of exposure to the sectors that are highly exposed to transition risks. The assets exposed need to be subject to stress testing and will need to be simulated at multiple scenarios, including a 1.5-degree accelerated decarbonization scenario, 2-degree scenario, and 3 to 4-degree soft decarbonization scenarios. Second, initiating internal capacity building on climate awareness. Banks should build their team's internal capacity and awareness of climate risks, including building staff capacity within the risk and compliance divisions, as well as among frontline relationships managers. These can lead to creative financial innovation and help banks unlock opportunities related to the energy transition. And third, dialogue with key clients on sustainability as early as possible. Banks are advised to initiate dialogues with key customers on sustainability as early as possible to capture the opportunities and support the shift to a low carbon operation. There are opportunities for banks to provide finance restructuring, provide risk sharing facilities and guarantee facilities, and to support the greening of the client's assets, all of which can offer important business and reputational benefits for the banks as a whole. Ms. Unju Park Bink, Head of Sustainable Finance at BDO Unibank, the Philippines' largest bank, also provided insights, wonderful insights on how the international community can support the low carbon transition, as you can see in the screen. Next slide, please. To close this session, I would like to share the following recommendations to mainstream green finance, which actually mirror what Lana mentioned earlier, but these are also especially relevant to developing economies in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. To learn more and get involved, please visit www.alatropartners.com/greenfinance. Thank you, and this is Marlon Apañada. I look forward to a rich discussion among the panelists. Thank you, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marlon, and very impressive presentation. And because the timekeeper told me we run out the time, so we may leave a question at the panel session. So now we may happy to invite Eike Jen, Director of Economic Analysis Coordination Division, National Assembly Budget Office, to give us the keynote of the panel discussion.
Hi, Professor Yukihara.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad to be here to join this session today. And as we observe, the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected the DMC's economy. And as the four our excellent presenters showed that the recovery from the current economic depression is one of the most urgent issues faced by many countries. If we approach it strategically, the stimulus plan can link to climate agenda. I agree with it. And as we see through these wonderful presentations, investment opportunities have widely opened to introduce innovative schemes to connect economic recovery, energy transition, technology innovation, and finance. So it would be great for us to accelerate the transition to low carbon economic system through this recovery phase. And in moving in this direction, securing financial resources may be a significant task. Other speakers pointed out that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the global economy's debt buildup, particularly in the DMCs as well. That raises an issue, so it could reduce the fiscal space, the availability of budgetary resources for DMC's governments for a green recovery. So fortunately, currently we observe the global proliferation of ESG investing in private sector. The trend is noticeable, and I think it could provide a possible option for green recovery. If we successfully connect that kind of stream, I mean ESG investing, to the climate finance, then it could provide a potential to mainstream the flow of funds into climate finance. So I'd like to ask questions to all speakers. Have you ever incorporate ESG principles into the programs or the schemes, the financing, the tools? And do you have any suggestions for the DMC governments to make a national plan to connect the ESG investing to climate finance? Clearly, this approach would help DMCs address climate change effectively. Yeah. Thank you for your presentations. I enjoyed all of you. Yeah, thank you.
Oh my, sorry, I just muted. It is very important to mention the issue of green finance and also energy issue, because the ADB will issue a lot of money to the different countries to help them have a green recovery and also to have a carbon neutrality target. So we also are thinking about how to use the money and how to distribute the money to the countries. So that's Mr. Aiken-jin raised a very good questions. And anybody who can answer questions?
I think I can go ahead, only because this was mentioned in the side event last night, where Securities and Exchange Commissioner F. Amatong mentioned about the role of ASEAN green bonds. In a short span of time from 2017 to date, there's already about $18 billion of green bonds that were raised. And all of that will, based on the ASEAN green bond standards, they will have to incorporate ESG principles. And so, but beyond that, many conglomerates, many companies have also signed up to standards like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and others, and then the UNEP FI Principles for Responsible Banking, which all incorporate ESG. So in our engagement with banks, in the Green the Banks initiative, ESG is becoming very critical, and more capacity building, especially for front-running relationship managers, will be needed for them to be mainstreamed in their cultural fabrics. So thank you. That's it from my end.
Okay, Mr. Robert, can you answer the questions? Because we raised some similar questions.
Yes, it'll be my pleasure. So let me just start by saying that I'm a little concerned that ESG is used as a term that's interchangeable with impact and SDG alignment. ESG has been around for a long time, and it's inherently a negative screen. It lists a number of things an investors ought not to do. They ought to comply with environmental, social, and governance safeguards. It's been around since 1980s. The DFIs, the MDBs did a great job in socializing that concept. It's before we were all acutely aware of climate change. ESG is now becoming more popular, and it's become a bit of a buzzword because a lot of mainstream institutional investors have discovered there is something like ESG. They're now often told, or at least not hindered at, taking into account stakeholder constituency interests. But that's far and away from having a positive orientation toward climate action and climate finance. And I would think that impact metrics like the GIN IRIS Plus framework, particularly when it comes to climate, or direct alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, would be a far more powerful framework to actually bring institutional investors to do something that's positive in terms of climate change. ESG is, in short, not going to cut it. I'm sorry to be the party pooper in this, but we need to be a bit more forward thinking around impact and sustainable development goals to move the meter on all of this.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Professor. Can I ask a quick question to Robert? Yeah. So
yes, please.
So, Robert, what factors you mentioned the impact? So, how can I fix the current situation? Do you have any suggestion to align the mainstream investing to the climate finance more effectively, or yeah?
You know, I think the net zero commitments from both sovereign governments, as well as corporates and institutional investors individually and collectively can be powerful if they in fact amount to real action and real change in previous behavior. And forgive me, I'm not entirely convinced prima facie that that's going to be the case. We've seen a lot of impact washing, a lot of greenwashing. It's very easy to say, this very often starts in a CEO office or a chairman's office, that our company, our investment operations will go net zero by 2050, 2040, 2035. And then people go on their merry way. And there's not an awful lot of checking or enforcing of those public promises. So the real, I think, game changer here is to hold institutional investors and companies accountable for what they say. And one of the organizations that I'm closely affiliated with and as an ambassador to the World Benchmarking Alliance is doing exactly that. They provide free benchmarking, very scientifically and rigorously put together, that essentially grade investors and corporates on what they have actually done relative to the Sustainable Development Goals, climate being one of the important goals. And so the philosophy here is that when you end up at the bottom of the list, not only you're being shamed into action, there might now be all sorts of ESG impact or SDG aligned institutional investors who will withdraw capital from you and will invest it in companies that do get it and do have a demonstrable track record of contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are accountability mechanisms that drive ownership of Sustainable Development Goals, particularly as it relates to climate. I think that's really the core of the issue.
Okay,
thank you, Robert and Marlon.
Liza and Tom Tomlin, can you answer the question, combining the question I raised to you?
Sure. So I'm going to start, if that's okay, and pick up on what Robert said as well, because as you said, Robert, I think just these net zero commitments are so important because it brings to the discussion CEOs. But then I guess that question about accountability and benchmarking is so crucial as well. I think, but to make sure and help accelerate the implementation of these net zero targets, which I sometimes worry is probably not happening as fast as we would have liked. The targets are coming forward, but the implementation is key, right? And I think that's where programs like ours come into play with UK Pact and what I was saying earlier about capability. So I talked a lot about the work we do, government to government, but a big part of what we do is around building the capability of the financial system as well. And we've been doing, for example, a lot of work on that together with China and also other countries. And we're trying to really ramp up that effort. And you asked about how we think that we can build that capability. So, really kind of creating these communities and sharing that knowledge amongst the practitioners is a key objective of ours. We have got other programs that help do that more directly as well, such as the Climate Finance Accelerator. But I guess that the action needs to be focused on the policymakers and building the capability of the policymakers of our finance ministries to make sure that the policies are set right so that the policy signal is such that the investments flow in the right direction, while at the same time increasing the knowledge and understanding of these issues of the practitioners and the investment community. And I think if we want to create change at the right pace, we need to have these two happen in parallel. And so that is what we are very much trying to do. And again, I think just pointing to an initiative like the NDC partnership, we are trying to work through the NDC partnership as well, to work more closely with central banks now, as well as work closely with economic ministries and finance ministries, really to help accelerate that and build that capability. So that's that. And the way usually we try to kind of conceptualize our work is on the green finance side, is that we try to not only help green the financial markets, but also finance green. So we're really trying to think about it into these these kind of two main objectives of ours to promote green finance and share all the work that we've done in the UK in the past 10, 20 years and all the lessons we've learned. We've done great things. We've also done things that didn't work so well. So we want to be very honest about it and share that expertise to help with that transition. So Tamran, do you want to maybe answer some of the questions?
Well, add something?
Yes, I can add to that. I think what Leila said about the importance of setting the right policy framework that really results in the investment that we ultimately want. I think one of the things that you raised, Mr. Tsatsudio, is around business models and around the fact that our policies need to be designed correctly to really incentivize the investment that we want. And one of the things that we've been doing is working really closely with businesses to understand what they need to unlock the private investment. And one of the things that's become clear is that whilst there may actually be enough investment for capital, the real need for some of these very long-term and large-scale investments like CCUS and hydrogen is around revenue support mechanisms and designing business policy that can create a business model for these technologies. So the work that the UK has been doing on this is consulting with companies on designing these business models for carbon capture and storage and for getting the hydrogen economy off the ground. And there's a lot of work going into that can be shared that then ultimately unlocks private investment and makes those technologies competitive against fossil fuel technologies. So that's just one example of designing these policies in a way that's effective.
I can also chime in, if that's okay. The
yes,
UK
we have only
government.
We have 3 minutes left only. So please make a brief comment.
Yeah, very, very quick one. The UK government has been very, very active in leading as part of their COP26 presidency, these kinds of green finance leadership and engagement of the Green Force. And just to plug a side event happening later tonight at 8 p.m. Manila time, we actually released a new report, the World Resources Institute, on unlocking a renewable energy future, how government action can drive private investment, which really talks about how the government policies can help private sector investment unlock the trillions needed for our low carbon transition. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add to this question about the private sector, the two things that I think are really key. Firstly, it's to realign incentives by putting a price on carbon. And secondly, by having mandatory disclosure requirements. So on that first point, when something is profitable, companies will do it. And I've seen this in all large companies, and particularly in private equity firms. They invest heavily in energy efficiency because they save so much money by doing so. So for small and medium-sized enterprise, for example, providing some loans and things to provide that upfront capital to have those kinds of investments would go a long ways. Likewise, just putting a price on carbon can really help drive those changes. The fossil fuel industry has benefited from many years from all these kinds of subsidies, which is part of why it is such a locked-in system. And secondly, on this point of mandatory disclosure, part of the problem I've seen with ESG and CSR reports is that companies can really select their own metrics. For example, I've seen a lot of companies that will report on how much paper they recycled, which of course gets at the question, why are they using so much paper to begin with? And when you have metrics like that, you're not really getting at the heart of, are we using too much? Are they doing enough? So I think really having mandatory disclosure requirements with consistent metrics that are thought out would go a long ways towards forcing companies to be as transparent about their climate impact as they are about their other financial impacts, anything that can influence their investors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Aikajun, did you satisfy the answers panelists give you?
Yeah, I'm fully satisfied. Yeah, thank you for the speakers and the professor Yugara. Yeah, I enjoyed the session.
Okay. Anyway, the timekeeper asked me to end this session, and I have to, end it quickly. In summary, I think that we have many wonderful. I think wonderful is a good word to say that your presentation here. Also, we are, it's a pity we have no enough time to discuss the things detailedly. However, we have an email address, and we can communicate through email. And also, I think the organizer will summarize our panel discussion into words, and you can see it. So if you have any further adding questions and comments, so please do it. And also, I raised several questions to you already, but there's also some of the questions I'm thinking about that. So I think that I can do it, and also you, I wish you can think about that and do some research in the future. Anyway, thank you again, and this is a really excellent session, and we have a lot of benefit get from this. And we wish that in the future we can meet face to face, not online, face to face conference in the future. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.